Michelle, and today I'm going to show you how to do one of our most favorite projects here at the Bead Gallery, the Treasure Trove necklace. This is a multi-strand necklace that gives you the effect of several strands that are woven together for a really nice full-bodied look, and it looks really elegant with pearls and gems and crystals and glass beads. It's very fun to do and it's very easy, so let's get started.
Michelle, I have a question.
Yes.
How do you keep the strands twisted so that it doesn't come undone?
That's the secret in this design. It's done as two passes, and the first one we're going to do uses 2 cards of nylon. This is a carded nylon that has the needle on the end. It's about 2 meters long, so a little over 6 feet, and we're going to need 2 cards because our first pass is done with 2 strands. Okay, so this is a carded nylon. When you take it off the card, it looks like this. Okay, so we have 2 strands of nylon. This is number 4 nylon, which is what we normally use for freshwater pearls that tend to have smaller holes. If you're using beads like crystals and glass that have larger holes, you can size up to a number 6 nylon, and if you're using really tiny gems, you can use a number 2 nylon so you don't have to pull with excessive force over the thread and risk breaking it. Okay? So for this project today, we started by selecting 2 colors of freshwater pearls, a light one and a dark one. Okay, and if you look at the strand of pearls that are the light ones here, you'll notice that they are a tip drilled, sort of flattened round shape, and the dark ones are just the sort of semi-round shape in about a 5 millimeter size. And notice we picked 2 different shapes of pearls because we do like different textures and different shapes in this project because it adds to the richness of the finished piece. Okay, after we picked our freshwater pearls, we picked 2 colors of crystal that go with each pearl, a dark green crystal to go with our dark pearl, and a light amethyst satin round crystal to go with the lighter colored pearl. And we also picked a bridging color to go with both colors of crystal that we use. So this is a chrysolite light vitriol 4 millimeter bicone, and we picked it because it has the shades of green from the base color of the crystal to go with the green crystal here, and it has hints of lavender to go with the lighter purple crystal there. This is a technique we're going to be using in our video today. It is called an overhand knot, and it is our way of joining 2 threads together. You're going to make a loop and pull both tails through like this and pull tight. So the 2 threads are working like they are one. This is an overhand knot. The second knot that we're going to work with today is called a square knot. Okay, so you're going to work with the 2 threads independently of each other, and the first thread's going to loop around the second thread like this, and this pulls the 2 threads together. And the second half is going to lock everything in place. And a traditional square knot, you always think right over left, then left over right. But in our project today, it really doesn't matter, so just go for it. As long as you have both halves where you pull everything together and then you lock everything in place, you don't really have to be worried about whether your left thread's going over your right or your right thread's going over the left. I'm going to start by doing an overhand knot at the very end of the thread, farthest from the needle. So the needle's on this side. I'm going to tie an overhand knot to join both threads together, just like this. Okay, And you don't have to leave too long of a tail. This is only about 1.5 inches because we're not really going to use the threads after. We just want to join them together so that they're nice and secure. Now I'm going to start my stringing, and I need to come up with a pattern. Okay, we're going to string a set of beads on one of the purple thread, and we're going to string a different set of beads on the green thread. And I need to figure out what my pattern is going to be that's going to repeat all the way down the length of my necklace. Okay, so maybe what I will do is, because I want one strand to look very green and the other strand to look very purple, I'm going to put the lighter beads on the purple string, and I'll put the darker beads on the green string. To get started, I'm going to decide what pattern I want for my necklace. So we'll start off by maybe putting a pattern like this on here, just so that the beads line up. And I'm going to push it onto the thread, like that. And I'm going to see, maybe I want to use a smaller bead so that my two large beads are not stuck together. And we'll just try something like this. Okay. Like this. And you want your sections to be about the same length. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a really big arc from one of the side that's way longer than the other, and it'll give you a weird sort of squiggly look. Okay, we want just a nice multi-strand effect. So this is my tentative pattern for our first pass. So I'm going to see what it looks like when we knot the two threads together. So I pushed my sections to the end of the thread where it's overhand knotted, and I'm going to see what it looks like when I knot the two threads together. So what we're doing here is we're doing sort of a square knot after the section of beads, and what that will do is form a little loop of beads, which is what we want. We're going to do a series of loops, of these loops, to make the first pass of our necklace. I think that looks good. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a second knot to lock everything in place. So the first knot that we did, which is just a simple half of a square knot, is to kind of pull everything together. And the second knot that we do, which is the second half of a square knot, is going to lock everything in place. Get the two ends of my thread together. And it's a little unwieldy at first because the threads are so long, but it'll get shorter as you make your piece. So that will just tighten. So I'm starting my second loop, and notice that I kept the green beads on the green thread and the purple beads on the purple thread. Okay, so I strung my beads on in the same order as the first loop, and now I'm going to make my next knot. Okay, and remember, the first half will bring the beads together like this, and the second half of the knot will lock everything in place. Okay, and you're just going to keep repeating your stringing and your knotting to make a series of loops that is as long as you want your finished piece to be. You're going to have a little bit of shortening when you weave in your third strand when we do our second pass, but it's not going to shrink that much. So just make it maybe 1 inch or 2 longer than the desired finished length.
If you use really big beads, will the bracelet or necklace get a lot shorter when you weave into the third strand?
If you use really large beads, your piece is going to feel shorter because of the bulk of the beads that are going to be on your finished piece. So yeah, you'll probably want to make pieces with larger beads a little bit longer than you normally would, or than you would with small dainty beads. Yeah.
And of course, they can just come and ask us if they're not sure, right?
Yes. So I have here a completed first pass of my treasure trove. This is about the length for a bracelet, but you can continue it to make it longer into a necklace length. But for the short time that we have together, this is a bracelet. Okay, so as you see here, this is a more monochromatic palette. We chose 2 pearls, which were these freshwater pearls here, in very similar colors. They're the natural kind of peachy pink color that you see in freshwater pearl. We just picked 2 different shapes, a round and sort of this flat keshi looking pearl. And we picked some colors of crystal that are very similar to the pearl color. This is silk in a 5mm bicone. And we picked some check glass in a similar peachy color, just for a different shape and finish. And as the sort of bridging bead, this one is one that has a bit more pop to it. It's a white opal double AB 4mm bicone here that we chose. And the way that the strands were strung are the way they're laid out here. So on one strand we had the round with the glass and the 4mm bicone, and on the second strand we had the flatter pearl with the 5mm silk bicone. Okay, so this is what our series of loops looks like at this point. Okay, now we're ready to add our third strand. Okay, which would be our second pass, and we're using a different stringing material in this pass. It is soft flex beading cable, and we're using the 0.014 inch diameter, which is the sort of the thinner diameter that we're going to use because the beads that we have smaller holes, so we're going to use that. And ours is silver plated over the dark steel color, so it doesn't darken any of the beads that we're going to be stringing on there. It also comes in a gold plate if you want a richer look and gold colored findings. And if you don't have either the silver or the gold plate, you can use the standard clear, which is a dark gray. Okay, so I've cut about a foot longer than my finished length, so this is 2 feet, to be generous, 2 feet of the beading cable, and we're going to have to attach it to one end of our piece. So here we have our completed first pass of our piece, our series of loops that we have made with the nylon thread. And now we have to decide what we want for our third strand, or the second pass, what we want it to look like. If you want to add bulk to your piece but not a lot of color, you can choose something like this 8mm fire polish as your predominant bead in this third strand. And that would add a lot of body to the piece without adding a lot of color, which is nice. Okay. If you want to add just a little bit of body and not too much color, you can go with a slightly smaller fire polish bead here. This is a 6mm clear, and again this will add some weight, visual weight to your piece without adding an extra color. Okay. Another way you can go is adding more texture and a similar color using these glass teardrops here. Okay, and you can also add more color with crystal, okay, like this. And you can also choose to bring back one of the colors you really liked from your first pass. And I really like this white opal double AB 4mm bicone because it's very sparkly.
I like it too.
Yes. So I think I'm going to use that again in my piece. And as you can see, this is really cute by itself, like this, but I do want another strand in there just to kind of give it a little extra body and to give it that really pow.
I like the smaller of the two fire polishes.
Okay.
I like that one a lot.
I think that by adding the 6mm fire polish to this piece, it'll be a very nice, comfortable weight, and it'll go really well with the bracelet that we have in progress. And if I were doing a full-length necklace, I would maybe choose to use the 8mm instead, but because it's going to be a bracelet, then I think the smaller of the two is a good choice. Okay, so for our third pass, we're going to be using the 6mm fire polish, vintage rose 4mm bicone, and white opal double AB 4mm bicone. I'm going to shake that out on the table. Okay, so I'm going to string on my small crimp, and then I'm going to push the cable through the first loop at the beginning of our piece, like this. Okay, and then I'm going to go back through the crimp like this, and so it makes kind of like a closed loop here. We're going to cinch this around the knot at the beginning of the piece, okay? And you can cinch it pretty small. So we're going to pull, okay? And it's okay if your knot gets weird over here, like that. We're going to cinch it so it pulls tight around the knot, okay? And for extra secure hold, we're going to go back through the loop again one more time and go back through the crimp, so it's a double loop that is cinched around our knot. It's getting a little tight in there. And then you're going to pull like this. Okay, so again, we want about a 5 to 6 inch tail on this side. Okay, and once we have our loop cinched tight, I'm going to get my chain nose plier and squash the crimp so that it holds our cable in place. So now we have our soft flex attached, and we're ready to string our second pass. Now I have my beading cable attached to my piece, and I'm ready to string on the beads for my third strand. Okay. I have to decide on a pattern for my third strand, so I'm going to start by sort of arranging them here and see what kind of pattern I like. I kind of like these fire polish, so I want them to show up more often than each color of crystal. So maybe I'll do a repeating pattern like this.
Is there any right or wrong to these patterns when you make them?
There is no right or wrong, it's just what you like and what you're comfortable doing. Okay, so there is no right or wrong.
So if I like pink, then I should put a lot of pink.
Yes, so if you like this vintage rose crystal, you could use it in a bigger size to emphasize that color that you will be adding, and you can also use it in a different shape. And if you like it a lot, you can maybe just do that and one other bead instead of 3 different kinds of beads here. Yes, but I like them all, and I want mostly the clear color, the clear bead to show, so I'm going to be using that the most in my third strand.
Question. So
yes.
Let's say I thought, oh, this will match a certain top that I have that's pink and brown. Would it be a good time now to introduce a brown color? Is it too late?
It is not too late to introduce another color, because this is mostly one color, which is the color of the freshwater pearls, that peach kind of really pale color. You can add a third color at this point, like a brown, maybe a dark brown, maybe in very small quantities just for that extra pop, instead of like a really large dark brown bead at this point. Okay, so let me test out this pattern and see if I like it in my piece here. It's very easy to test because we're stringing on the beading cable. So it's very easy to take beads off if you don't like your pattern or you don't like the way the piece is looking. So I have my 3 different kinds of beads strung on my 3rd strand of my piece. And I'm looking at it and I think it looks really beady right now. And everything looks the same. Okay. If you want to bring a little bit of definition to some of your beads, you can choose at this point, or we could have done it in the first pass, to add some metal spacers. What the spacers do is sort of break up the line of beads so that you can see and appreciate the beads in smaller sections, a little at a time. Because I don't want to add too many metal spacers to my piece, I'm going to just add them to every other fire polish bead that I'm stringing here. So I'll do as, we'll see what this looks like now. And I'm going to put one on each side of the fire polish just to kind of frame it. I think the little hints of silver add just the right touch, and it also adds a very nice texture as well to the finished piece, and it makes it look very rich. So now I have my pattern established for my 3rd strand here. And again, after every 1.5 inches or so, you want to crimp a micro crimp to hold all your beads in place. So I'm going to poke on my micro crimp.
What happens if you don't use a micro crimp?
In the beginning, when we first started making our treasure troves, we didn't use micro crimps, and the beads would spread out and it'd be very hard to control the gaps on this 3rd strand here. So we use the micro crimps like a knot on a piece of thread to hold the beads in place. Okay. So you're gonna get the micro crimp, and you want to make sure that all the slack is pulled out of the piece or pushed out of the piece. Okay, so you don't have the gaps. And we're just going to squeeze a micro crimp so it bites onto the thread, but don't squeeze it so hard that you actually cut through. Okay. And I'm going to do maybe 2 reps, and I'm going to start to weave my 3rd strand through my piece. Okay, so let's do one more section. So now I have a couple of repetitions strung on my 3rd strand, and I'm ready to weave it into my first pass. Okay, so the way we're going to do it is we want to make sure that the loops, as we weave it, are going to be lying flat in the same plane, and we want the beads that are the same to be on opposite sides of each other, like this, before we push in our 3rd strand into the loop, like this. Okay. And we're just going to work it into the loop like this. So it looks like that. Okay. And I like to flip it and always push in from the top of the layer to the bottom like this. So we're going to be flipping our piece back and forth. And again, make sure that they're on opposite sides of your loop before you push in the 3rd strand, because that will lock the beads into position. Like this. And one thing you want to keep in mind is you don't want to push these loops too far down this weaving strand here. Otherwise it's going to look like the gathers on a skirt, and you'll end up with a greater concentration of your loops like on one side. You want everything to be kind of flat.
Could you show us what you mean?
I don't like the way it looks, so it's hard. Like say you wanted to shove it all the way down like this. You see how squashed your first set of loops is? You want it to be kind of smoothed out along the 3rd strand like this and evenly distributed.
So don't pull all the slack out.
Yes, don't pull all the slack out of the loops, otherwise you're going to get that gathered effect. and it's not always gathered evenly, so it doesn't look as good if you do that. Okay, now if you accidentally made your first set of loops too small, what you can do is you won't be able to actually weave this third strand through your piece with the beads strung on them, because some of the beads won't go through your loop. Okay, and if that happens to you, that's not, all is not lost, don't worry. What you can do is you can actually string part of your pattern on to your third strand and then push it through your loop like this. Okay, and string on the beads that were too large to fit on the second half like this, and then you'll want to crimp them in place so that everything stays. Okay, like this. So this is how our piece is looking now. Okay,
It's pretty.
yes. Okay, I have a couple more repetitions to do and then we'll be done. So now I have my third strand pretty much strung all the way to the end of my first pass. And notice that there's, this is my last crimp over here, and I have a little bit more to go so that the beads meet the knot at this end. So I'm going to add maybe one more bead here, like this, and we want the ends to kind of match up. So maybe I'll put one more bead on here, just like this. Okay. So now the two passes are the same length, and I'm going to string on my second small crimp on this side here, and I'm going to push my thread through the last loop just like we did in the beginning and go through the crimp like this, and this makes a loop. I'm going to sort of cinch it tight. And you want the crimp to sit pretty much on top of the last bead that we strung. So we're going to pull all the slack out of the piece. Okay, and kind of drag it down like this. Sometimes it helps to have a plier on hand to kind of pull the slack out. Just like this, and I'm going to loop around one more time just for that additional security and go back through the crimp one more time. My threads are getting in the way, so I'm going to push them through like this. Okay, go through the crimp one more time. Pull tight like this, and now I'm ready to flatten my crimp on this side. Okay. Get my chain nose plier and flatten the crimp to lock everything in place like this. Okay, so now we have two ends of nylon and one end of beading cable on each end of our piece. We're going to want to cut away the threads on each end and leave only the beading cable for our finishing. So there's a couple of ways you can finish off these nylon threads here. One way that I really like is to put a little bit of glue on the knot at the end of the piece. Okay, and you just want to saturate the knot with the glue so that they don't unravel.
What kind of glue do you suggest we use?
This is called Hypo Cement. It's a really good glue for gluing your knots and other thread work.
What about using nail polish or crazy glue?
I would stay away from the crazy glue because it tends to make your thread ends brittle and it dries, I think, too fast. But you can use any kind of white or crafting glue. That's appropriate, but it doesn't have the needle applicator that the hypo cement has. So it's just a little bit messier when you're gluing your knot. Okay, so once we've saturated the knot with glue, and that's just to keep it from unraveling, you can cut the threads down with the scissors, like this. And you want to cut it fairly close to your knot, but don't cut your knot. Okay, so we're done with that, and we're going to work on the other end. Okay, there's also another option is we have a tool called a thread zapper. And it looks like this. Basically, it's like a light bulb filament here that gets very hot when you activate it. So keep your fingers away from it when you're going to press your button because you don't want to burn your finger. The thread zapper gets hot enough to burn right through the thread. And it also melts the ends of the thread together so that it doesn't unravel. And you can actually use the thread zapper to melt the two thread ends together into a big blob, like this. Okay. And that'll also keep your knots from unraveling. One more option is you can get a lighter and burn the thread ends down into a blob. And I only recommend that if you have extensive experience with a lighter because you don't want to burn either your fingers nor the piece that you're making. Be very careful.
Is that why you like to use nylon instead of other kinds of cords?
Yes, we prefer nylon because when you do melt it with a lighter, it does cause the threads to ball up and finish off really neatly. Yes. If you did this with silk, you wouldn't be able to melt it down. You'd have to use the glue and the scissors. Okay. So we have our nylon ends cut away, and all we have left are our beading cable ends, and I'm ready to add my cone and my clasp. So when we're selecting a cone for the end of our piece, you want a cone or a bead cap that has enough depth to cover the knot and the crimp, okay, that we use to start our piece. So this looks pretty good in terms of being able to cover up our slightly messy ending. Okay, so we're going to slide our cone down to the top of our beadwork like this. And now I'm going to get our crimp so that we can attach our clasp. So I strung on my cone, stringing on a crimp, and I'm going to string on this thing called a wire protector. It's a little horseshoe shaped finding. When we string on our clasp, the clasp doesn't have the chance to rub through the thread.
I love wire protectors.
Yes. They're a very good investment in making sure that your piece doesn't break near the clasp where it usually does. Okay. So I have my thread going through both ends of the wire protector, and now I'm going to string on the first half of my clasp. So. So when it's put together properly, you see I have my cone, I have my crimp, I have my wire protector that the thread is going through completely, and then I have my clasp strung on there. And I'm going to go back through the crimp and down through the cone. So I'll have this complete circuit that my thread has taken, like this. So I've completed the circuit that holds my clasp onto the end of my piece. And And the way I'm going to finish this up is I'm going to get my chain nose plier and I'm going to carefully squeeze just the crimp. And what that does is it pinches everything in place so that my crimp can't move and nothing gets out of place here. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to get my crimping tool and I'm going to fold this crimp in half. Okay, so you notice that there are two openings on the crimping plier. There's one on the inside, it looks kind of like lips, and the one on the outside that's a little bit more rounded. I'm going to place my crimp flat in the inside opening. My crimp is resting in the inside opening flat. Okay, and all I'm going to do now is give it a squeeze. And what that does is it dents the crimp down the middle. I'm going to turn the crimp 90 degrees to the side and I'm going to put it back in my plier in the outside opening like this, and I'm going to fold the crimp in half along the dent I just made. So you give it a squeeze like this, and now the crimp is folded in half. I'm going to use my chain nose plier and squeeze it a little bit more just to make sure that it is pressed evenly along the thread. Just like that. Now if you don't have this fancy little crimping plier that folds your crimps in half, you will only be able to squash your crimp flat with the chain nose plier, but you won't be able to fold it in half. And if you don't have the crimping plier and you're only able to squash the crimp, we highly recommend using these crimps here. These are called twisted crimps. And all you need to do is squash them flat with the chain nose plier and not fold them in half. Okay. So they're a good alternative if you don't have a crimping plier available. Okay. So after my crimp is folded in half, I'm going to cover it with my crimp cover. Okay, and the way we use it is I'm going to put the crimp cover in the outer opening of my crimping tool like this and line up the openings, and I'm going to use my crimping tool to guide the crimp cover around the crimp that I just folded in half. Like this. Okay. And your crimp needs to be folded in half for you to cover it, otherwise it's not going to fit in the cover. And it's easiest if you kind of hang the piece up and down, but for viewing purposes I'm going to try to do it flat. Once you have the crimp cover around the crimp, you're going to give it a squeeze like this till the two edges are almost touching. Okay, then what you're going to do to give it a more rounded shape is to reposition the crimp cover in the pliers so that the opening is covered by the jaw of the plier. Okay, and then you're going to give it a final gentle squeeze so that the two edges meet. Okay, give it a squeeze. Has a little bit of bounce to it, so sometimes the edges want to pull away from each other. You just squeeze it a little bit harder. You don't want to squeeze the crimp covers too hard because the metal is very thin and you can easily dent it out of shape, and then you can't save it. Okay.
What technique do you prefer? Do you like using the fold over crimp and the crimp covers, or do you like the twisted crimps?
I like the look of the crimp cover and the crimp like this because it looks like a little silver bead at the end of your piece. But I really like the security of the twisted crimps And if that's the only, kind of crimp that you can use, it's not a terrible alternative. It's actually a very good one. Yeah. It has a nice look to it, too. But I like the look of the little silver bead at the end.
Very finished.
Yes. Okay, and once you have it all finished off like that, we're going to just trim the cable away with a wire cutter. And you just want to make sure that you're cutting the right cable like this. Okay, and don't cut anything else. Now we're going to do the same thing to the other side. And this is the reason why you want to have a nice length of tail. It's very hard to crimp with a very short tail. Okay. Even this is a little short. Okay, crimp. Wire protector. Sometimes the wire protector, the little legs are really closed at the end. You can use your nail to kind of move them away from each other so you can get your clasp in there. So I'm going to open it up just a little and run the thread through the length of the wire protector like this. Okay, so it's exiting out this end. We're going to string on the second half of our clasp. Go back through the crimp and the cone, and we're going to pull all the slack out of the piece. So you can actually hold the clasp like this and pull down, and you can squeeze the two ends of the wire protector together to get a more closed loop like this. Okay, once you have all the slack pulled out, you're going to make sure that it looks just right, and then we're going to flatten that second crimp with our chain nose plier like this, and finish it off with the folding it in half with the crimping plier and covering it with the crimp cover, and then you're done. I'm going to dent it, turn, fold in half. Squeeze it with the chain nose plier just to make sure that it's nice and tight. Let's get our crimp cover lined up around the crimp. Turn it and give it a final squeeze. And you want to make sure that the edges of the crimp cover just meet. You don't want them to overlap. Okay, they should just touch. And now I'm going to trim my wire away. And now we have our finished piece.
Thank you.
Yay. In this thing over here, these are some of the things that I have made a really fun sheet for that. And now we have our finished. Broke. Oh, I suck at crimping. Okay, what happened?
Okay, that is such the blooper material. That was like an OMG.
Sad.
Okay, let's take a break.
Okay.